He was just pumping gas, until a police car screeched in, lights blazing. Cut to sound of a gun cocking, then, out of nowhere, a gun in his face. No questions, no explanation. But when he spoke, the officer's hands started to shake. The sun had barely set over a quiet suburban street in Charleston, South Carolina, when Marcus Taylor pulled his black SUV into a gas station. He was heading home after a grueling 12-hour shift on base. Dressed in plain athletic wear, Marcus didn't look like anything out of the ordinary. Just a tall, calm black man trying to refuel and grab a bottle of water. But as he walked out of the store, bottle in hand, the shriek of police sirens cut through the air. 2 patrol cars screeched into the lot, tires burning against the pavement. "Hands where I can see 'em," a voice barked, laced with panic and prejudice. Confused, Marcus froze. A flashlight beamed into his face as a white officer with a rigid jaw and shaking hand aimed a pistol at his chest. Another officer flanked him, weapon drawn, treating him like a violent criminal. "What did I do?" Marcus asked, voice steady but firm. "Get on the ground, now!" the officer shouted, ignoring the question. Gas station customers paused, phones already recording. Marcus slowly raised his hands. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, eyes locked on the officer's. There was no fear, only warning. But the officer didn't care. All he saw was a black man at night in an expensive car, and in his mind that meant trouble. What he didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to check, was that the man in front of him wasn't just anyone. He was a decorated Marine Corps captain, and what happened next would change the careers and lives of everyone involved. Marcus stayed still, hands raised above his head, watching the cop's finger twitch near the trigger. Years of military training had taught him not to escalate, even when staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. He had been in war zones, disarmed insurgents, and led entire platoons under enemy fire, but nothing compared to the danger of being a black man in America with a nervous cop pointing a weapon at him. The crowd at the gas station was growing, murmurs rising as cell phones captured every second. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "my name is Captain Marcus Taylor. I serve at Joint Base Charleston. My ID is in my back pocket." The officer didn't flinch. "I said shut up and get down." Marcus slowly turned his head toward the second officer. "You want to verify that before this becomes a national incident?" Still, no response. Then, a sharp voice from the crowd called out, "He's telling the truth. I recognize him. He's military." The lead officer hesitated, but his weapon remained trained on Marcus. Sweat beaded down his temple. Marcus took a controlled breath. "Check my plates. This vehicle is registered under a Department of Defense program." Finally, the second officer holstered his gun and moved toward the car. He radioed in the plates. There was a long silence. Then the radio crackled, confirmed. "Registered to U.S. Marine Corps Captain Marcus Taylor. Clearance level, Omega Black." The first officer's face went pale. Marcus slowly lowered his arms, the silence deafening. "You had your gun in my face because of my skin, not because of anything I did," Marcus said, eyes never leaving the officer's. The moment had shifted. The hunter had become the hunted, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The officer's hands trembled as he slowly lowered his weapon, realizing the enormity of what he'd just done. The gas station had turned into a silent courtroom, bystanders standing in judgment, cameras still recording, capturing every second of a scene that had spiraled from routine to ruinous. Captain Marcus Taylor remained standing, tall and unwavering. There was no rage in his voice, just an icy calm that struck harder than any yell. "Do you know how many of my brothers didn't come back from Afghanistan?" he asked, locking eyes with the officer. "And yet here I am, back home, facing down a gun not from an enemy, but from someone who's supposed to protect me." The younger officer, the one who had run the plates, now stepped forward. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion. We got a call about a suspicious vehicle." Marcus cut him off. "Suspicious or black?" The cop had no answer. His silence said enough. From the crowd, someone shouted, "Say his rank, say his name." Another voice followed. "You just pulled a gun on a Marine, man, a hero." Embarrassed, the first officer stepped back, eyes darting around as the crowd closed in with judgment. Then a woman stepped forward, clad in a blazer and badge. "Captain Taylor?" she asked, revealing her credentials. "My name is Detective Ramirez, Internal Affairs. I saw everything." The officers turned pale. Detective Ramirez had been getting coffee nearby. She'd witnessed it all. "You two need to hand over your body cams and weapons, immediately." The first officer stammered, "Wait, ma'am, it was just a misunderstanding." "It was a threat to national security," she snapped. For the first time that night, Marcus allowed himself a breath. The tides were turning, and now the accountability he'd silently wished for had arrived. Detective Ramirez didn't waste time. "Sergeant Wilkinson, Officer Blake," she said sternly, nodding at each officer in turn. "Turn in your weapons and place your body cams on the hood of your vehicle. Now." The two cops hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Wilkinson, the older, more aggressive one, finally blurted, "You can't be serious. He looked like a suspect." "We were acting on a 911 call." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "You mean the suspicious black man pumping gas call?" "Yeah, I heard it. I also watched you pull a gun on an unarmed Marine without warning." "That's not protocol. That's bias." Blake reluctantly unhooked his body cam and gun, placing them on the hood. Wilkinson gritted his teeth, but Ramirez stared him down until he did the same. Meanwhile, Marcus remained calm, arms folded across his chest, a storm of emotion behind his eyes. He wasn't just thinking about what had happened to him, he was thinking about every black man who didn't have a military badge or a camera crew to protect them. "Captain Taylor," Ramirez said, turning toward him, "I want to personally apologize for what just happened. I'm forwarding the footage to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. You have every right to press charges. And you should." The crowd erupted with shouts of support. A young man live-streaming the entire encounter added, "Y'all, this is going viral. They messed with the wrong man." But Marcus wasn't smiling. He stepped forward, looking Wilkinson in the eye. "You saw a threat because of my skin. You drew your weapon because of your fear, not because of my actions. I'm not the only one who deserves justice. This country does." Wilkinson had nothing to say. His career was already slipping through his fingers, and this was just the beginning. By the time Marcus returned home that evening, the video had already gone viral. Clips of him calmly facing down a drawn weapon, revealing his military identity and calling out racial profiling, were being shared across social media like wildfire. Hashtag Captain Taylor trended on every major platform. News outlets began reporting within the hour, Marine held at gunpoint by cop, while doing nothing wrong. Marcus sat in silence at his kitchen table, still in his gym clothes, the tension of the night hanging heavy. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from fellow Marines, journalists, politicians, and even former commanding officers. Some were checking on him, others were asking for interviews. A few apologized for a country that still hadn't learned its lesson. His younger sister, Maya, arrived with takeout and wide eyes. "Marcus, this is huge. You're everywhere. They're saying this could lead to a full investigation." He looked up. "I didn't ask for attention. I just wanted to go home." "But that's exactly why it matters," she said softly, "because you didn't do anything, and yet it almost cost you your life." Later that night, Marcus opened his email and found a message from the Secretary of Defense's office, a formal acknowledgement of the incident, expressing support and concern. The message ended with, "We are proud to have you serve this country with honor. Let us know how we can serve you now." The weight of those words hit him hard. All he had ever done was serve with dignity. And yet, a man with a badge had reduced him to a suspect in seconds. The next day, Marcus wouldn't just be trending, he'd be speaking live on national television, and the nation was about to hear the truth, raw and unfiltered. Marcus sat in the studio chair, the stage lights warm on his face. Across from him was veteran journalist Diane Whitmore, known for asking the hard questions and expecting real answers. The cameras were rolling live on national television. Millions were watching. Diane leaned in. "Captain Taylor, first, thank you for your service. Let's go straight to it. When that officer pointed a gun at you, what was going through your mind?" Marcus didn't blink. "I thought about my mother," he said quietly. "I thought about how many times she warned me to be careful, how being a black man in this country can be more dangerous than a battlefield. I thought about how my service, my rank, my sacrifices, none of that mattered to the man holding that gun." Diane nodded solemnly. "You remained calm, some are calling your composure heroic." "I wasn't trying to be a hero," he replied. "I was trying to survive. My training kicked in. But the truth is, I shouldn't have needed to use military discipline to avoid being shot in my own country." He paused. "The real issue here isn't just one bad cop. It's the system that told him I looked suspicious for existing." The audience in the studio was silent. People at home leaned closer to their screens. This wasn't just an interview, it was a reckoning. Diane asked, "What do you want to happen next?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Accountability. I want policies reviewed, training reformed, and consequences enforced. Not just for me, but for every person who didn't get a camera, a badge, or a second chance." The interview ended with thunderous applause, but Marcus knew this was only the beginning. His voice had become a spark, and the fire was spread. Morning after Marcus's interview, city officials woke up to a political storm. The mayor, the police commissioner, and even the governor's office were flooded with calls. Civil rights groups were demanding action. Veteran organizations voiced outrage. And ordinary citizens, black, white, and everything in between, wanted answers. By noon, the Charleston Police Department held a press conference. Police Commissioner Linda Hart took the podium, a stone-faced expression betraying the pressure she was under. Cameras flashed. Reporters bristled with microphones. The whole city watched. "We have reviewed the footage and body cam recordings from the incident involving Captain Marcus Taylor," she began. "What we witnessed was unacceptable. An internal investigation is underway, and both officers involved have been placed on unpaid administrative leave, effective immediately." A reporter shouted from the crowd, "What about criminal charges?" The commissioner didn't flinch. "That is up to the district attorney's office. But let me be clear, this department does not tolerate racial profiling, nor will we protect those who do." Across town, Marcus watched the press conference on his laptop, arms crossed. His expression didn't change. He knew how easily departments used public statements to protect their image. But this wasn't about optics anymore. The country was awake. Just then, his phone rang. It was a representative from the Department of Justice. "Captain Taylor," the voice said, "we're formally opening a civil rights investigation into the incident. We'd like to meet with you directly." Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "I'll be there." Meanwhile, advocacy groups began organizing protests, not just in Charleston but across the nation. What happened to Marcus had struck a nerve. This wasn't just about one man. It had become a symbol of deeper systemic wounds, and for the first time in a long time, people were listening. 1 week after the incident, Charleston's downtown streets were filled with thousands of people. It wasn't just a protest, it was a movement. Veterans marched shoulder to shoulder with civil rights activists. College students carried handmade signs that read, "Protect Black Lives, like you protect borders, and honor doesn't wear just one uniform." The air buzzed with chants, music, and the deep hum of solidarity. At the front of the march walked Captain Marcus Taylor, dressed in full marine dress blues. He hadn't intended to lead, but when he arrived at the march as a quiet guest, the crowd had parted like the Red Sea. People pointed, applauded, and chanted his name. Someone handed him a megaphone. At first he shook his head. He was a soldier, not a speaker. But the moment needed more than silence. So he raised the megaphone and said, "I didn't come here today to be praised. I came here so this doesn't happen again, to me or anyone who looks like me." The crowd roared. "I've worn this uniform in war zones under fire, alongside brothers and sisters of every race and background. Out there we don't ask what color you are, we ask, can I count on you? But somehow back home, that's the first thing people see." He pointed toward City Hall, where leaders watched from behind glass windows. "If those who swore to protect us can't tell the difference between danger and dignity, then they don't belong in uniform." It was the speech of a lifetime, and it was broadcast live. Across the country, police departments began announcing new bias training policies. Veterans signed open letters calling for systemic reform. Even a senator quoted Marcus's speech on the Senate floor. Marcus had come to heal quietly, but he had awakened a nation. 3 weeks after the confrontation, a formal hearing was convened at the Charleston City Courthouse. It was no longer just about Marcus. It had become a precedent-setting moment, an examination of power, responsibility, and race in law enforcement. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, civil rights lawyers, veterans, and community members filled every seat. Even the mayor attended, sitting stiffly near the back. On one side sat Marcus Taylor with his attorney, a seasoned black woman named Camille Rhodes, known for fighting and winning civil rights cases across the South. On the other sat Officer Wilkinson, looking smaller than he ever had in uniform. His lawyer tried to frame the situation as a misunderstanding, a stress-induced misjudgment. But Camille wasn't having it. She stood confidently. "Let's be very clear. My client was not running, not resisting, not even raising his voice. He was pumping gas." The officer pointed a loaded weapon at a United States Marine based on a stereotype, one that could have ended in blood. This wasn't a mistake. It was misconduct rooted in racial profiling. The room was silent. Marcus was asked to speak. As he stood, the courtroom held its breath. "I didn't ask for this fight," he began, "but I won't walk away from it either. If officers can't recognize the people they swore to protect, especially those who've already put their lives on the line for this country, then something is broken. And it's time we fix it." The judge nodded, taking notes. Outside, a crowd waited for justice, not just for Marcus, but for the countless others who never got their day in court. When Marcus exited the courtroom, reporters surrounded him. One shouted, "Do you want revenge?" He paused, then said, "No, I want reform. and I want it now. 2 months later, the verdict was in. Officer Wilkinson was found guilty of excessive use of force and racial profiling. He lost his badge, his pension, and his right to ever work in law enforcement again. Officer Blake, though less aggressive, was suspended and ordered to undergo 6 months of intensive training and community outreach before any reinstatement. But this story was never about just punishing 2 men. What Marcus Taylor had triggered was far greater. The city of Charleston implemented sweeping reforms in police protocol, including mandatory bias training, stricter de-escalation policies, and a civilian oversight committee. State lawmakers began drafting legislation to standardize racial sensitivity training for all officers. The U.S. Department of Justice launched a new initiative to protect veterans from profiling, named in honor of Marcus, the Taylor Protocol. Still, for Marcus, it wasn't about awards or recognition. He returned to his quiet life, still serving on base, still humble in his presence. But everywhere he went, whether on a military flight line or walking through town, people stopped him. Not just to thank him for his service in uniform, but for the battle he fought out of it. One afternoon, while speaking at a local high school, a young black student raised her hand. "Captain Taylor," she said, "did you ever think you'd be famous?" He smiled. "I didn't want to be famous. I wanted to be respected. There's a difference." She nodded, eyes wide. As the students applauded, Marcus realized something important. The real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in every mind that had changed. Every voice that had been raised, every door now opened wider because one man refused to lower his hands in silence. He had stood his ground, not just for himself, but for all who deserved to be seen, heard, and safe. And that stand became a legacy.